Hey guys, welcome back to a new video, and in this video we're gonna create our first backend server using Kotlin with Spring Boot framework. What is Spring Boot? Well, Spring Boot is a framework which will provide us a lot of dependencies using which we can write our own backend. So let's get started with our video and see how we can actually build it. So in this video we're gonna build a note-taking application backend server. So first thing first, open up your browser and simply type here spring.io. So this is their official website. You can read all of the things that you want to read regarding the Spring Boot or Spring. So I'm going to create an initial project. So for that, what you can do, you can go to this project. At the bottom we have Spring Initializer. So just click on it and here you can create your Spring Boot application very easily. So as you can see, we have two options in project. Either you can choose Gradle Groovy, you can choose Gradle Kotlin or Maven. Because we are most often familiar with Kotlin Gradle, that's why I'm using a Gradle Kotlin, and of course we will use language Kotlin. And I will choose the default selected Spring Boot version. And now it's time to provide some project metadata. So I'm using here dev Himanshu, and in place of artifact I'm using note taking. If you want to provide any kind of description, you can provide it over here. If you want to change the name, you can change the name over here. By the way, the rest of things I will choose the same. Like the packaging is jar and my Java version is 21. I'm not using 17. Okay, so we are pretty much done with the project setup. Now it is time to add dependencies. So for that, as you can see over here, this place is totally dedicated for the dependencies that you want to add. So Spring Boot will produce a lot of dependencies. So basically we want to create a REST APIs. So for that we have to just use Spring Web dependency. Just type here web and this is the dependency that we want to include in our project. Just click on it. So it will include this dependency in your project. So yeah, we are done with the project setup. Now it's time to download zip file. So for that you can simply click on this generate and it will start downloading the zip file for you. So we have note taking zip. Go to your download and simply extract this note taking zip. Okay, so this is our note taking 3 and this will contain all of the things which is required in order to execute this project in our IntelliJ IDE. So if you want to build backend with IntelliJ IDE, you have to download IntelliJ IDE, and also Android Studio is built by IntelliJ, so that's why we are very familiar with the project structure, the other things like the Gradle setting, how we can set up Gradle, how we can manage Gradle. So all of these things we are very much familiar with Android Studio. So due to that reason, I'm going to use their IntelliJ IDE for developing this backend server. So IntelliJ IDE, simply click on it, download it and open up in your laptop, and after that we will continue writing our backend server. So I have already downloaded this IDE in my laptop, so this is my IDE. So now I'm gonna open up my project that we have downloaded. So click on this open, go to download and note taking 3. So simply click on it and press open. Alright, so this is my project. Simply open it. Source, we have main, we have test module. If you want to write test cases, you can do that thing in this module, and this is a place where we will write all of the things regarding our server. Open up note taking application. This is a entry point of our backend server. We have note taking application, annotated this thing with Spring Boot application, and this is our main function. Cool. Open up your build.gradle.kts and this contains our plugin, our group, version, Java toolchain. Basically it contains the version we were using here 21. As you remembered, in the project creation we were using Java version 21. Due to that reason it uses here 21. We want to use a repositories Maven Central, and these are dependencies included. Let's say you want to add more dependencies in this dependencies closer. Well, it's very easy. You can simply click on this add starters and you can do the same thing that we were doing during the project creation in our Spring website. If you type here web, this is the dependency that we have already included. But if you want to do that thing here in your IntelliJ IDE, you can do that thing very easy by using this. Okay, so as we have already included, I'm not gonna add this thing again, so simply close this UI. We have here Kotlin compile options, we have few tasks. So this is our build.gradle.kts of our backend server. Open this resources, and in this resources we have application.properties, and in this application.properties you can define your environment variable. By the way, in our use case we don't require any kind of environment variable for time being, but if you are creating any big backend server, then for sure you want to add environment variable, then this place is very good option for you. We have static files. If you want to add index.html files or any other HTML files, you can do that thing over here in statics. Cool, so enough talking, let's get started. So in Spring Boot, it already follow MVC pattern. So here we have four things. We have controllers, we have service, we have data source, and we have model. So first let me create this package first, and after that we will discuss what is the use case of these things. So first I'm gonna create a package. This is for my data sources. Next we have controllers. Next we have services, and lastly we have model. So in model we will put all of our model classes. Like in our case we are going to build a note taking backend server, so we'll have a note. So this note will be represented in a form of data class. So in this model, first let me create that. So it's a data class, name is note, and in this node we have of course id, and I'm gonna use uuid dot random uid to string to generate id for each node. Next we have title, and lastly we have description. So this is my node model. So this model package contains all of our model classes that we will use in our backend server. Cool, let's create our data source. So for that I'm gonna create a class, and the class name is node repository. So if you want to tell your Spring Boot framework that this is my repository, you can consider this class as a repository. So for that we will use annotation, and by default Spring Boot have dependency management techniques. It handles all of your annotation and build a dependency graph for you. So I'm using here a repository. So now our Spring Boot framework will know about my node repository, that this is a repository. So it will consider this as a repository and use it according to the use cases that Spring Boot will have under the hood. Nice. So in this I'm gonna create my fake data source. So for that I'm using here mock nodes, mutable a list of node. So this is my database. So first I'm gonna write a function which will return me all of the nodes that we were having in our mock nodes. So it's a very simple function. So this is my repository. Now it's time to go to our services and create a service. Now service is a place where you can write all of your business logic that you have. So let's create a class, and the class name is node service. So in order to tell that this class is a service to your Spring Boot framework, what you can do, you can simply mention here service. Just like in Android development we were using dagger hilt, and we will use provide to add the dependency in our graph. Similarly in Spring Boot we'll have two annotation. If you want to register your class into your dependency injection graph, or in Spring Boot words it is called container. So if you want to register your class in that container, we will use component annotation. So let me just control click on this service. Here you can see component. So if you want to register any class, any interface into your Spring Boot container, you can use component for that. And if you want to add something, some function return type into your container, then we will use beans annotation. So let me just show you. So function get nodes, return type is list of node, and in this I'm gonna use my repository. So private wall repository, node repository, and our Spring Boot framework will already know how to create node repository and inject it in our node service, right? we will not going to tell everything to our Spring Boot framework. It is automatically understand what are the dependencies they have in their container, and when we want it, you can simply inject it. Cool. So in get nodes, I'm gonna use my repository dot get nodes to return all of the mock database things that we have. Let's say I want to inject this function return type in my container. So for that you can simply use here bean. Just like in Android development, Dagger Hill dependency injection framework, we will use provides. Here we will use bean. Cool. So we are done with our service. Now service is a place where you can write all of your business logic, and this is my business logic. It's a very small business logic though. Cool. So we are done with service, we are done with repository. Now it's time to create our controllers. So controllers will control all of the incoming requests and responses. So let me create a class, and the class name is node controller. This is a class, and we have to annotate this class with rest controller, and just below to it we will use here a request mapping. So this request mapping contains the endpoint. So let's say my host is this www.abc.com. So this is my host, and let's say I want to hit this endpoint. So automatically Spring Boot framework will know and delegate this endpoint to our node controller, because request mapping says just map this endpoint to this controller. So it simply map it, and after that you will have to write all of the function which will handle all of the request that is coming from our front end. So in my case, first I'm interested in getting all of the information from our backend. So if you want to perform get HTTP method, you can simply use here get mapping. So function get nodes, list of node, and I'm gonna return. So basically we have to use here services. So node controllers depend on the service, and service will depend on our data sources. This is the dependency graph that we have under the hood. So if you want to see it, I'm gonna show you. This is node service. Click on this. So it says to you this is their dependency, and if you want to see the graph, what you can do, just simply click on it, bean dependencies graph. As you can see, for the time being our node controller not depend on node service, but node service will depend on node repository. So this is the dependency graph that you can see and understand how dependency injection will work in Spring Boot. Okay, so go back to your node controller, and node controller will surely depend on our service, which is node service. And now if you check the dependency graph, see, node controller depend on node service, and node service depend on node repository. Cool. So now it's time to use it. So I'm using a service.getNodes. So it will return me all of the node that we will have in our backend. Cool. So this is our first REST API, and I'm gonna just execute it. Okay, so this is executed. Let me show you the port. So it uses port 8080. Now I'm gonna open my Chrome browser and use here localhost. Port is 8080. So this is localhost, so it will point to my local device, or you can say laptop. Just use here colon 8080. So this is my base URL, and we have one endpoint naming nodes. And if you want to perform get request, get HTTP request, it will return you the list of nodes that we were having in our backend server. So just enter. So for time being we don't have any node, that's why we are getting here empty array. So go back to your IntelliJ IDE node controller and add few nodes in this. So repository node. So remove the ID because ID is automatically generated by UUID. In place of title I can use title, and in place of description I'm using here description. Again re-execute your backend server, open up your Chrome browser and just hit it. So as you can see, this is the list of node that we were receiving over here, and this is the first API that we built together. Cool. So now it's time to build few other APIs, like this is the get request of HTTP, and in HTTP we have few more methods like post, delete and patch. So let's create REST API for this. So for the time being, I'm going to create one more function in our repository which handles the deletion operation. So for that, I'm going to create a function delete note, and in this note I'm going to pass my note ID. So first thing first, in this delete note, what I can do, I can find my note in my backend server, whether the note ID exists or not. So for that, I'm going to create a temp note naming variable, and I'm using my mock notes first or null. It ID is equivalent to note ID. So if it will return me something, that means yes, we have temp note, and we simply delete it. So if temp note is not null, just use your mock notes remove and remove the temporary node. So this will remove note from our database, and if it is not the case, I'm gonna throw no such element exception. Basically, no element corresponding to this note ID is present in our database. So this is my delete logic. Now it's time to use this delete note in my service. So go back to your node service, and here just create one more function naming delete. Instead of using note, you should use the ID of your note. Type is string. Use your repository dot delete note and simply pass your ID that you are receiving from this function. Now it's time to use this function in our node controller. So go back to your node controller. Now here I'm gonna write one more delete mapping, and in this we have to pass the note ID. So requirement is note ID. Now it's time to create a delete note function, and in this we have to mention this note ID is coming from our API endpoint. So due to that reason, we were using here at the rate path variable note ID, and in this path variable be sure to mention the note ID name is exactly same. So it simply get the note ID from our API endpoint, and just after that I'm using my service dot delete and pass this note ID. So this method is actually used to delete a note from our backend server. So let's see whether it is working or not. So first let me just execute my backend server. Okay, so in order to test this delete operation, you have to download a Postman. Well, Postman is a platform which will provide you all of the methods. Like here we have a lot of HTTP methods. You can perform it very easily using Postman. So simply download it. Go to your Chrome, type here Postman download. Open up the first link, download it and open it up. So it will look something like this. So this base URL is nothing but it is pointing towards my local host. So it's a kind of environment variable for my Postman, and you can add it by simply going in this new environment, click on this new environment and add a new environment variable for you. So base URL colon 8080, it will represent my base URL, and slash nodes is actually pointing towards the first get request because I'm using a get. So if I just hit it, it will return me the list of nodes that we are having in our backend database. So I'm going to copy this ID, and now it's time to delete this node. So for that, just choose here delete method, and just after this node add a slash and pass your node ID, because if you check the backend, slash nodes slash node ID, due to this node ID. So this is our node ID. This is because if you check my backend server, we have slash node ID. So we have to pass node ID at the end of our API endpoint. Now when I hit simply send 200, okay, that means our node is deleted successfully from our database. Now if I simply hit this get request in order to get all of the node from our backend, you can see we'll receive empty array. Okay, so that means deletion is performed successfully. Now we have one more case in this deletion. If you check the repository, sometimes it might throw an exception, so we have to handle it. So to handle this exception, go to your node controller and write a exception handler. So it's a very basic way of handling exception. So we have here exception handler, and in this you have to mention the type of exception that you want to handle. So for me, I want to handle no such element exception class. Write a function handle no such element exception, and return type is response entity, type is string. Basically I want to return a plain message. So return response entity, pass your exception message and the HTTP status. So HTTP status is of course not found. So this will handle the exception if your repository will throw any kind of exception. Now we have an exception handler. Cool. So deletion is pretty much done. Now it's time to add a note. So for that I'm using here post request. So for that we'll use post mapping function create note, and this time from our front end we'll receive a note request body. So if you want to get that request body within your create note function, you can use your annotation request body, and type of request body is note. Nice. It's time to go back to your repository and create a function add note. So in this add note, what we can do, we can simply check this note is existed in our database or not. So well, it is never be a case, but just to be sure I'm gonna write one more check for that. So first I'm gonna just check whether this note is existed or not. So if our temp note is equivalent to null, then only we'll proceed for the insertion. So use your mock notes and add this basic note. Okay, else so what you can do, you can simply throw an exception. Illegal argument exception, cannot add note with id note id. Okay, so as you can see the return type of this thing is note, so I'm gonna return here note. So this is my add note function. Now go back to your service, and in this service you can create one more function naming create note, and this create note is actually able to create a note in our database. Return your repository dot create note function return type. Okay, so we are done with our service. Now it's time to go back to your controller, and in this controller I'm gonna use my service dot create note and simply pass it, and at the end I'm gonna simply return what we are receiving from this create note. Okay, so remove this response entity because we are returning here a note. Okay, so we are done with this create note function. Now we have to write one more exception handler for illegal argument exception, because in our repository if you see we are throwing illegal argument exception. Now it's time to handle it. So for that go to your node controller and just write one more exception handler for illegal argument exception. Handle illegal argument exception, pass the exception, and it will return your response entity. Type is string. Let me make some space for you, and I'm gonna simply return here a response entity, pass my message, and this time I'm using status bad request. Cool. So we are pretty much done with this create note. Now it's time to use it. So for that just execute your backend server. Okay, go back to your postman, and this time we are interested in post. Endpoint is same, and okay, so body is also same. I'm gonna use this same body. So first let me just get it. So we have only one note. Now if I just post this, okay, 400 bad request, I think there was few problems in this particular endpoint. So let me just check what was going on under the hood. Okay, post mapping, this is correct. Go to your repository, add note, mock note, first or null, this is also fine. If it is null, okay, then we have to add it and return, otherwise it will throw an exception, cannot add note with id. Okay, it says bad request, that means surely it will throw exception from our repository. Let me just hit one more time. Okay, so we don't have here content. Okay, so we have here description, not content. Now I think it will work. Okay, so as you can see, it is working, and I'm gonna just use here get request to see whether it is added or not. As you can see, it is added. Okay, so post request is also working. So we saw deletion, we saw get, we saw post. Now it's time to see patch. So for that, open up your repository. So patch and put, we have two different way of updating our node item. So if you want to update a single parameter within a specific node, you can do that thing very easily using patch, and also you can replace the whole node using patch. But with put, you can only able to replace the existing node within your backend server. So patch is more flexible. Due to that reason, I'm gonna use here patch, not put. So for that, let me just create a function for you, and I'm gonna call this patch node, and this time I'm gonna pass node. Return type is updated node. Now in this, I'm gonna just use the logic that we were using for delete nodes. So just copy this thing, come back to your patch node and paste in here. So first we have to check whether this notice exists or not in our database. So node ID. So if it is not null, what we can do, we can simply remove this temp node from our mock nodes, and after that I'm using mock nodes and add the node, okay, that is coming from our front end or from our request body, and at the end I'm gonna simply return it. Cool. So if it is not the case, I'm gonna simply show that this particular node is not present in our database. So node.id. So this is our patch operation. Go back to your service, and in this service just write one function to patch our node. Return your repository dot patch node, pass your node and come back to your controller. Just below to it, I'm gonna create one more annotation, patch mapping function patch node. This time we will receive the node as a request body, and I'm gonna simply use my service patch node. And we were already handling this exception, illegal argument exception and no such element exception. Nice. So I'm gonna just re-execute this backend server. Go back to your postman or my postman, of course. Just click on send. Okay, so this is my body. Now I'm gonna simply copy this body, choose method patch, and I'm gonna use body, and I want to update title from title to title is updated, description is also updated. So for this you have to open this body and choose this raw. Okay, so now when I send it, as you can see, it will return me the updated node. Title is updated, description is updated, and when I use get, you can see we are receiving the updated node that is present in our database. Alright, so we saw everything. We saw all the HTTP methods, which is very commonly being used in our day-to-day life. That's it for this video. I hope you got the basic concept of Spring Boot, how to create a project and how to create your own REST API. It's very easy because we were using Kotlin. It's very easy for us to understand the concept and also what is going on under the hood. So we will meet in our next video where we will discuss something new about Android or this Spring Boot. Till that, goodbye. And if you want to support me, you can just buy me a coffee, buy me a thanks, or become a member to my channel. Thank you for watching this video.